All right. Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive. You know how this works. We find some really fascinating stuff, maybe intense sometimes, but we go through it all and pull out the big ideas and insights just for you.
Consider it your shortcut to becoming an expert, or at least sounding like one.
Exactly. And today we are going all the way into the trenches of World War I with Ernst Junger's, excerpts from War's Inner Experience. And what's so interesting is that Junger wasn't just some, armchair general writing about battles from a distance,
Oh no, he was right there in the thick of it, actually fought in the trenches.
which makes his perspective on how war totally transforms individuals, even reshapes society, so powerful, like really getting under the skin of what conflict actually means.
Yeah, and these excerpts, well, they're not holding back. We're talking about raw humanity, the kind that war reveals. Then these incredible, almost visceral descriptions of what it was like to actually be in the trenches.
And he also talks about courage, like
Yeah.
how important it was, how it basically defined these men. And he's always contrasting this war experience with the world that existed before, the one that was shattered.
We'll even get into his thoughts on pacifism, which are really, really interesting given, everything else he's saying about war.
All right, so right off the bat, Junger uses this really intense image, kind of like he's starting an epic poem or something. He talks about a new star on the horizon, and it signals this like massive upheaval. Everything's changing, old values melting away. Super dramatic.
Oh yeah, totally sets the tone. And right away what he's saying is that World War I, it wasn't just some, political squabble between countries. This thing ripped the world apart, changed everything, spiritually, societally, forever.
And for him and for his entire generation, it was like this defining experience, right? He says the war hammered, chiseled, and hardened them. Just think about those words.
It wasn't something you could just walk away from. Junger actually says this war, it became like the axis around which their entire lives revolved.
Yeah.
Even when there was peace, it was always there.
He even says that this war raised his generation to fight and that they'd remain fighters for the rest of their lives. Like, he's talking about some deep, permanent inner transformation.
Absolutely. And then he contrasts this with what came before the war. He describes this society that was obsessed with like material progress and technology, like they thought they'd solved all the world's mysteries and could just keep going up and up.
But underneath all that, right, under that shiny surface,
He says they were still naked and raw, like civilization was just this thin veneer. And then war. War ripped it all away.
and what it revealed, well, it wasn't pretty. He talks about the war tearing apart the community of Europe and these primal instincts just bursting out.
Almost like civilization was barely holding back this really dark side of humanity. And this leads right into a section on the primal nature of humanity and war. He just titles it Blood, straight to the point.
Yeah, and he uses this really strong metaphor comparing humanity to this mysterious, tangled jungle. So you've got the beauty in there, but then also this brutality all mixed together.
And he talks about how each generation is built on top of the decay of the ones that came before, like this endless cycle.
One thing that really stuck with me is that this idea that man is just this vessel, constantly changing, but carrying all the thoughts, the deeds, the feelings of those who came before, almost like we're haunted by history.
It's heavy stuff. And he's saying that even though we put on this show of being civilized underneath, the animalistic still sleeps.
And when society breaks down, like it did in war,
The mask comes off, the primal man comes out, driven by pure instinct.
like we lose all those rules and ingredients to keep us in check. And he talks about thought and feeling getting boiled down to this one terrible idea,
Yeah.
just destroy the enemy.
What's so unsettling is that he describes this thirst for blood existing alongside the horror. It's almost like this dark relief from the pressure.
Yeah, he even says it brings a relief from the pressure. It's not this like glorious, heroic thing. It's a base primal urge.
He really lays it bare, calling war this fundamental, this primal relationship, a struggle for existence in its most naked form.
And he doesn't flinch from the details. He talks about the sounds of combat, the cries, the horror, even the bloodlust, like he was right there in it.
And he goes deep into the psychology of the fighter, this internal tug of war between terror, fear of death, and this urge to just unleash everything in battle. It's intense.
And coming back from that, well, he describes the fighter like a night walker, waking up from some horrible dream.
And he's horrified by what he's capable of. It's this chilling moment of self-recognition.
So from this deep dive into the primal, we get to the next section, Gray, where he just focuses on horror itself. He describes it as this feeling that's been dormant, buried deep, and then it explodes in these violent shocks.
He makes this interesting comparison with prehistoric humans who lived with horror every day, constantly. He actually says it's what separated them from animals.
Right, because an animal might feel fear, but horror, that's different. He calls it the first weather light of reason. It's like this dawning awareness of something bigger, something way more terrifying.
And for Junger's generation, that horror would often just appear suddenly, even in the middle of intense action. Like, he talks about this feeling of approaching the baptism of fire, that moment right before everything breaks loose.
And then this image. He sees a gray figure by the wayside, a dead soldier. It shatters any romantic ideas about war instantly. He even mentions the flies already gathering, just this stark reality.
It's a symbol of death being everywhere. He talks about walking through the front lines at night, and it's like this desolate wasteland, and he feels totally alone, surrounded by death. He even describes the sounds like a dying man crying out.
God, yeah. He describes lying in a shallow trench between dead bodies for days, covered in flies. And then he asks this question, like he's challenging the reader, who can speak of war who was not in our ring? It's like, you weren't there, man.
And he talks about the soldiers who did come back, how they were just completely saturated with horror. Their eyes were empty.
Yeah, he even says they looked like they were taken from the coffin and that they needed to be intoxicated just to cope with what they'd seen.
It's heavy stuff. And then there's this jarring thing he points out, how close laughter and madness were in that situation. Like this absurd image of fancy hats in a bombed-out shop window or a rat crawling out of a dead body. It's surreal.
Yeah, like your mind can't process it all. He says they got tired of just reciting the facts. It was the uncertain, the indescribable that really captured it. So we get to the trenches. This section he just calls the trench. He describes this place, this environment, in such detail. He calls it a steel tower made of labor, horror, and blood. It's a Moloch, consuming all these young lives.
For those who don't know, Moloch was this ancient god associated with the child sacrifice. So Junger's making a point about how destructive the trench
It wasn't
was.
just a physical thing. It messed with your head, too.
Yeah, he talks about the trench having a grip and a cold fist, even on people far away. Death was always there, hanging over you, whether the fighting was intense or not.
He describes going towards the trench at night, seeing more and more destruction, the smell of decay, rats everywhere. It's like descending into hell.
And once you're in the trench, it's this weird silence, but you feel the tension, like something's about to happen. He compares it to being on a ship surrounded by icebergs. You're trapped.
And they get to know the trench so well, in all its moods, the good, the bad, the ugly.
It wears you down, though. He talks about the endless labor, the bloodshed, the exhaustion, and then just waiting for the next attack, that eternal readiness.
He says that waiting could be worse than the actual fighting, just knowing it's coming.
Yeah, he compares trench warfare to living with wild animals, always on edge. He contrasts it with being a pilot, which he sees as more fleeting, more exhilarating.
He says the trench turned war into this brutal trade. You're not a warrior, you're just a day laborer of death. Any romantic ideas about war? Gone.
And even the breaks, they're just these desperate attempts to grab onto something, to feel alive, to experience something.
But even in those close quarters, he describes this camaraderie in the shelters, like they're all sharing this nocturnal landscape of feeling.
He talks about these moments of connection amidst the horror, comparing it to finding gold in a cave full of people.
But it's so fragile, right? There's always something trying to break it. The enemy's always there, digging tunnels, launching raids. You feel the pressure building.
And then, boom, an attack comes. Any sense of security, gone. And he says that's when you see the true face of the trench, the real brutality.
He describes these close quarters fights, just pure aggression, driven by instinct. In the aftermath, he says the trench looks like a rumpled bed of someone who had died of convulsions.
And then slowly it goes back to that monotonous routine until the next explosion.
So, from the brutality, we get to this section about sensuality and how intense life feels during war. He calls it eros. It's this idea that war rips you out of your routine and you're faced with death all the time, so your instincts take over.
It's almost like facing death makes you want to live more intensely. He sees this rejection of refined culture, this rebirth of barbarism, where strength and courage are everything.
There's this desperate need to grab onto life, to enjoy every moment, because who knows how much time you have left.
It's like this urge to exploit, splurge, waste everything before it's too late. All the societal rules about pleasure and restraint, they go out the window.
He even talks about how life seems to burn brightest when death is closest.
Right. And he sees sex as a kind of victory of life, this way to escape from yourself and connect with something bigger.
He talks about two main drivers for this.
Yeah.
The basic urge to just live and the need to escape from danger through intense experiences.
He says war changes love itself, makes it more ruthless.
Yeah.
And he talks about this new breed of men coming out of the war.
They're hardened, energetic, and used to seeing terrible things.
They want the most intense experiences, whether it's alcohol, love, anything that cuts through the numbness. They don't care about social conventions anymore.
He paints this picture of Eros being just out in the open in these war-torn cities, this raw, powerful force. But even amidst all the destruction, he sees moments of genuine connection.
He uses this example of a student and a peasant girl finding solace in each other.
And he sees these moments as almost a kind of redemption, even when death is all around them.
It's a really complex view of how these basic desires play out in extreme situations.
But then we move into pacifism. Right from the start, Junger states that war is the most powerful way for nations to interact, to settle their differences, for better or worse.
He sees it as this natural law, something we can't escape. And he talks about two types of pacifists: the idealists who love humanity and the fearful who just want to stay safe.
He describes the idealist as a tragic figure, almost a martyr, who gets crushed between the warring sides. The fearful pacifist, well, he's just trying to save his own skin.
He warns about what happens when a whole nation becomes pacifist. He sees it as a sign of weakness. He even uses the example of the dodos, how they went extinct because they were peaceful.
It's a pretty provocative statement. He also tells this story from Brussels, where he saw soldiers who were tired of war, but still had this deep desire for violence. Like they didn't really understand what they were fighting for, but they still wanted to fight.
And he argues that the real cause of war isn't politics or anything external, it's human nature itself. He even mocks some anti-war sentiments, saying they boil down to, it's not good to be killed.
Right, like it's all about self-preservation. And he points out this disconnect between the soldiers at the front who are used to death and those back home.
He even talks about seeing joy in some soldiers when they were killing this naked war driven by this primal need.
It's disturbing, but he's being honest about what he saw. And while he agrees with the idealists that all humans are connected, he still sees conflict as inevitable, no matter how the ways we fight might change.
So we get to courage. This is where Junger really gets into the nitty-gritty of what it means to be a man in war. He calls manly courage the most delicious thing, this feeling of pure boldness.
He describes feeling a sense of reverence for yourself when you act courageously. And he says it's not just a personal thing, it's the basis of all progress, of civilization itself.
He sees courage as this commitment to your cause, even if it means dying for it. And he says it's contagious. It spreads from one person to another.
He talks about how battle can make a cause sacred, and how a good cause becomes even more sacred through battle.
He also respects a brave enemy. He sees a battle as a judgment of God between two ideas. And he says that warriors, because they've faced death together, they can understand each other in a way that others can't.
He calls warriors day laborers of a better time, breaking down old structures. And he says the achievement of battle unites all fighters, no matter what side they're on. He even describes war as a masculine form of procreation, which is a really, really strong image.
It is. He talks about a hard European morality, where the goal is everything, this language of power that only the bravest understand. And it's that exhilaration of your own boldness in the face of death that he sees as the essence of courage.
He even compares courage to dance, this expression of something deeper, something eternal. He says it's the only way to explain why anyone would willingly face death.
Then he introduces us to the Lanzknechts, these almost archetypal warriors. He starts by criticizing modern society for being soft, afraid of power, obsessed with equality.
In Landsknecht, he embodies action, pure and simple. He hates any romanticizing of war.
He's different from the bourgeoisie in arms, those who see war as a duty, who want to keep things orderly. The Landsknecht, he's born for war. It's his natural state.
He's not necessarily a hero, but he's a conscious fighter. Junger describes meeting these guys in a ruined dugout, this rough, masculine space.
Their language is short like bursts of gunfire, and they're always drinking, pushing reality away.
They're restless, always going out into no man's land,
Mm.
risking their lives just for the thrill of it.
Even when they've seen horrible things, they come back pale, but with that same spirit.
He describes their divine impudence, this carefree attitude towards death, this belief that spirit is everything.
He sees their willingness to die not as heroism, but as this crazy need for stimulation, whether it's fighting, drinking, or loving. They're these primal forces shaking things up.
And he contrasts them with the gentlemanly way of fighting, which he sees as dying out.
So we shift gears completely to the section called From the Enemy. He starts by describing the atmosphere during battle, the air itself feeling dangerous.
He talks about how impersonal modern warfare is, how one person feels so small against these huge forces, and yet you still have to push forward, even when you're terrified. He calls it a higher will driving you.
It's like being in a nightmare. He describes advancing under fire, seeing dead bodies like wax dolls. Death becomes normal.
And you stop seeing the enemy as people. They become this faceless force. But within your own army, emotions are contagious. Fear spreads, but so does courage and even bloodlust.
He says the way you understand things changes in those moments. Words have a different meaning. Reality gets blurred.
He tells this story about meeting an enemy patrol in no man's land, the sudden violence, the dehumanization.
But he also talks about those rare moments when you see the enemy as a human being, even though you're trying to kill them. And during an attack, he describes the two sides almost merging into one force.
It's this weird, almost mystical idea, and he ends by imagining a god looking down on it all, smiling.
And then we get to before the fight, the lead up to the big offensive in 1918. You can feel the tension, the weight of everything that's led up to this moment.
He talks about the propaganda, how deeply ingrained it was, the fatherland being the center of everything. War was seen as this sacred duty, the path to greatness.
They believed they'd be rewarded for their sacrifices, that this would be the final push. And he describes the captain's speech, getting everyone fired up.
There's this strong sense of camaraderie, and the veterans, they're not afraid anymore. They've accepted it.
He even describes a strange beauty in those last days before the battle, how everyday worries just disappear.
It's like a kind of freedom, a detachment from life.
Yeah.
Even death is seen with this sense of peace, this hope that all is well. He says soldiers understand death better than philosophers ever could.
He even says death for a conviction is the highest achievement.
It's a powerful statement. He talks about drinking wine, wanting to be alone, and he describes the army as this one giant weapon. Men, animals, machines, all moving together.
Their goal is to crush the enemy with technology and sheer force. He calls the machine the intelligence of a people cast in steel.
The machines are taking over, making the individual less important. He sees this war as the world spirit shaping life in this incredibly destructive way.
He talks about the feeling of power radiating from the army, this Caesarian will. Everything's changed. Warfare is different now.
There's a shift away from old symbols towards this bitter seriousness.
Yeah.
It's all about power and intellect now. And he wonders if maybe in the future, people will look back on these battles with some kind of twisted admiration.
He sees two types of people in war. Those who find meaning in it, and those who are just destroyed by it. But for him, war is life itself, this raw expression of the will to fight and to dominate.
So as you can see, Junger's view of war is really, really complex. It goes way beyond good and evil, hero and villain.
It's about what war does to us, how it reveals the darkest parts of human nature. He shows us the primal instincts, the trauma, the search for meaning, and all the chaos.
And this leads to a question for you, the listener. How do Junger's observations apply outside of war? Can we see these same patterns in other situations where people are pushed to their limits?
Yeah.
What are your own inner experiences when you face difficult challenges?
It's something to think about. And this is just a taste of Junger's work. If you found it interesting, I'd encourage you to read War as Inner Experience for yourself.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Until next time.